everyone. Welcome to the second public lecture of the 2026 Summer Intensives here at RYI. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce the Director of Studies here at RYI, Professor Julia Stenzel. She received her PhD in Buddhist Studies from McGill University, and her research interests include ethics in Indian and Tibetan Buddhism, as well as wandering to places, which she will be talking about today. So please join me in giving Dr. Julia Stenzel a warm welcome.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for this very nice introduction, and thank you everybody for coming. Yes, so I will give this talk about wandering and meditating in wild places. Andy asked me to give it. Normally this is my summer off time. These are reflections on the chöd practice in the Tibetan Buddhist Longchen Nyingthik tradition called Resonance of the Dakinis Laughter. Actually, later I will present another translation. Carried out in wild places according to the tradition of nyensa. And I would like to start out by disclosing my role in the research that I'm going to present here now, because I am not an ethnographer. Generally speaking, I see myself as a textual scholar with a personal interest in the application of Buddhist wisdom and meditation and practices. But I participated 1 month in this nyensa or nyensa kyam, wandering in wild places and practicing the chöd practice of the Khandro Nyingthik as a practitioner. And I did not start out doing that as an ethnographer who would ask people to consent that they are being interviewed or that I observe them. I did not even know myself what I was getting into. But afterwards, when I talked about my adventures, then I noticed that there was great interest. And therefore, tonight I will simply tell some stories and give some scholarly background information for those of you who are interested in that background. So I will start with a narrative. I actually wrote a diary when I was there, and of course now. So I will start with a narrative. It was 3 weeks into the journey. Let's see how this goes. So it was 3 weeks into the journey. We were about 100 kilometers northeast of Kathmandu at an altitude of 3,500 meters. April 23, 2025 was the 25th day of the lunar calendar, so that is the Dakini day. As soon as it was light, Khentrul Rinpoche, who you see here, Wang Lama and I started our way to Palmotang, only equipped with our chöd damarus, bells, kanglings, and pecha texts. The group had spent the night in Wang Lama's wooden shed, sleeping around the fireplace. It was our last day in Pematsal, one of the hidden lands of Guru Rinpoche. We were still exhausted from climbing to Guru Rinpoche's throne, the shuk tree, on the northern edge of the valley the previous day, 4,500 meters high in the snow, and we were weakened from eating herbs from the forest that gave us slight cramps in the belly. This is Wang Lama. This morning, the three of us had risen well before sunrise and walked for a few hours to reach the plain at the end of the valley. From Pematsal, we had to cross the river, walk through meadows of purple primroses, and then along the eastern side of the riverbed, climbing higher and higher. During the night, the sky had cleared up and the temperatures had fallen to a frosty cold. The valley lay partially in shadow, as the sun made its way over the peak of Purbi Chashu of the Himal Jugal range that separates Nepal from Tibet. It left giant shadows on the plain at the very end of the valley. That was Palmotang, Khentrul Rinpoche, Khentrul Ngawang Lhundrup Rinpoche is his long name, declared. It was very still. Wang Lama prepared the fire for the smoke offering, the Riwo Sangchö, and there was a single line of smoke that rose into the clear sky. So what is so special about Palmotang, this glorious plain? We hear about Palmotang from this prayer called the Barche Lamsel prayer that many of you will know. And here is an excerpt. So repeatedly in this prayer, we have Guru Rinpoche's mantra, Oma Hung Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Hung. To the Dharmakaya Amitabha we pray, to the Sambhogakaya, the great compassionate one, we pray, to the Nirmanakaya Padmakara we pray. And Padmakara is Guru Rinpoche. Wondrous emanation, master of mind. In India you were born, you studied and you contemplated. To the heart of Tibet you came to subjugate its arrogant demons. In Orgyen you dwell, accomplishing the benefit of beings. On Palmotang's plain of glory, you gave the 12 Tenma goddesses their binding oath. So there we have it in the prayer here. And then it goes on to say, up on the Kala Pass of central Tibet, you bound the white snow goddess Gankar Shame under oath, and it goes on and on about other places where Guru Rinpoche bound other demons, gods, protectors under oath. And then there's always a refrain that says, and of all these great gods and demons, some offered up the very essence of their life force. Some were turned into guardians of the teachings. Others took the pledge to act as your servants. O mighty one with magical powers and miraculous abilities. That is, of course, addressing Guru Rinpoche. With your compassion, inspire us. With your blessing. With your love, guide us along the path. With your realization, grant us attainments. With your power, dispel the obstacles facing us all. And you can read the whole prayer. It's online, translated by the Lotsawa House. So this is the prayer where Palmotang is mentioned, and Khentrul Rinpoche pointed that out to us. Now, moving forwards. So we were standing on this very plain of Palmotang, and I tried to imagine the 12 Tenma goddesses declaring their oaths to Guru Rinpoche. Khentrul Rinpoche began reciting the Rivo Sangchö, bringing offerings to the 4 classes of guests. Those are the 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the 3 roots, Guru, Yidam, and Dakini, Dharmapalas and protectors, all sentient beings, and finally our karmic creditors. These are the 4 classes of guests. Then we carried out the extensive Khandro Kekyang with the dances, so the chöd practice with the dances. I tried my best jumping, dancing, and chanting on an uneven ground at the altitude of around 3,500 meters. After the 2 pujas, we had a quick breakfast of tsamba and tea. Palmotang lies at the end of this valley and is enclosed by the high mountains of Himal Jugal to the east. You see, kind of get a little bit the impression here. But it turns to the north, this waterbed, and there is a giant rock that blocks the way, and that is called Brahma's Kapala. And that is what you see here, kind of black here. This photo is in the morning when it was still in the shade. By the time we walked back, the Brahma Kapala seemed to show small streams running down the rock, black and shiny in the morning sun. This is a very auspicious sign, Khentrul Rinpoche said. It is nectar overflowing from the Kapala, very auspicious. He had pointed out many signs, mostly auspicious one, over the past 3 weeks, that we had been on the Nyensa in the mountains of Yolmo. So he was reading the landscape in that way. So what is this meditation of Nyensa, and who is Khentrul Rinpoche? Nyensa Kyam literally means roaming wild places and refers to an aspect of the chöd practice of cutting ego clinging. Yeah, chö is translated sometimes as cutting ego clinging. The word Nyensa literally means a savage, haunted, and frightening place, and denotes primarily charnel grounds, but also water springs, river shores, remote jungle places, and also sometimes caves. All these places believed to be inhabited by demons and therefore feared by humans. These places are said to be conducive to spiritual practice. So the Nyensa pilgrimage implies roaming without remaining in any of these places for more than 1 night. One aspect of the meditation of this chö about which I will talk a little bit more in a moment, is that there are dances. And another one is that, you have to keep moving, not stay at one place. So before leaving on this nyensa kyam, I had to learn the steps of the dances, and one has to dance while playing and chanting parts of the text. You might have seen that actually last year in Lumbini, the Anis from Nagigompa, they performed such a dance with chöd. And while you are dancing, you imagine yourself surrounded by dakas, dakinis, and you dance in the different directions of the universe. While I was learning that, then you have a diagram like that that describes the steps. And for example, the recitations that you do in Tibetan, of course, but in translation, you go through the different continents of the universe. In the south, for example, you would recite, dancing on the southern continent Jambudvipa, where the dance floor of the dakas and dakinis is a triangle. I dance on the head of arrogance of the Lord of Death and beat the skull drum of wisdom of equality. Hung, 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 pei. So as you can see here from the recitation, there's the idea dancing on top of a demon, subjugating what the demon represents. In this case, it is the klesha, the negative emotion of arrogance, but then it's also of desire, of anger, of ignorance, and so on. And every direction has a main demon. Here it's the Lord of Death. And as you can see, it is about power, about subjugation. Now, Khentrul Rinpoche. Khentrul Rinpoche, the leading lama of this nyensa, is a close disciple, or was a close disciple, of the enigmatic Dzogchen yogi Chatral Rinpoche, who lived until 2015, and many of you know him and his places. Khentrul Rinpoche, his disciple, had given a promise and had to fulfill a promise, I should say, that he had given years earlier to Chatral Rinpoche, that one day he would accomplish the feat of practicing these 108 consecutive practices in charnel grounds. And that is what he had set out on this spring of 2025. The practice of nyensa kyam comes from a tradition that both Chatral Rinpoche and Khentrul Ngawang Lhundrup practiced all their lives, the Longchen Nyingthik tradition. And as I said, it involves dances, cham dances. It also involves 3 nightly sessions of the chöd practice that every participant in the nyensa has to do individually, and 1 practice together of chöd. The individuals, they stay in their own individual tents, and they have to wear special gear. And yeah, as I said, we are changing locations every night. Where did this all happen? In the hidden land of Yolmo. Some of you might know about Lama Wangdu, who used to be active in the Kathmandu Valley, and he was leading the same kind of practice in 108 charnel grounds in Kathmandu Valley. But since there's this strong connection of Chatral Rinpoche and Khentrul Rinpoche with Yolmo, then Khentrul Rinpoche decided to do it in Yolmo. So what is Yolmo? Yolmo or Helambu? You can see here that is what is in this yellow square on the map. Yolmo is known thanks to the activity of the 15th century Tibetan treasure revealer Ngakchang Shakyasangpo. It is a mountainous area filled with traces of Guru Padmasambhava. Traces means caves that were blessed by his presence, handprints, footprints, headprints, meditation seats, they're called shukji, and other metamorphomic rock formations, many of which have been identified by Chatral Rinpoche, who reportedly spent years and years in Yolmo and exploring all these different places, every corner of Yolmo, it is said. So a little bit more about the practice of the Longchen Nyingthik chöd. This group, of which I was part, consisted of 4 chöd practitioners plus 2 helpers, and we started the journey in the beginning of April 2025. And here, for example, you can see that was the highest point that we reached. In the back is the Dorje Lekpa Mountains. And here one cannot see it, but behind is sort of like a stupa, and that was called the Shukji, the meditation seat of Guru Rinpoche. So each afternoon, we would set up our special tents in wide distances so that we would not hear from one another. We would not hear the instruments and the chanting, and we should feel the power and the loneliness of each place. In reality, that didn't always work. Yeah, one can hear the chanting and the damarus, the drums, actually quite far. But the idea was that everybody is on their own at night. At dusk, the whole group comes together and we perform one session of chö together. And then with the last chant, everybody would wander off to their respective tents. And we had to consecrate that tent once more with dance and chant. And then you retired to perform the 3 nightly practices, one at 7 p.m., 11 p.m., and 3 a.m. At one point, my cell phone couldn't be charged anymore. We had a solar charger that didn't work anymore. So I kind of had to make it up when these times were, or had to listen when somebody else was starting. Then every morning we would all come together again. And then it was kind of actually pretty light ambiance. Yeah? We would chat about our nightly experiences and have a cup of steaming butter tea over the fire. And then we would continue our journey. Some of the times we would be in caves. One doesn't see too much of this cave. This is actually Yangdak Chok, Guru Rinpoche's cave, high up in the mountains from Amayangri. And here you see us doing the practice of chö. So what is actually this practice of chö? I know many of you know that already. Giving you a little bit of a background. Normally, when we think of chö, we think of the practice of chö that was brought to us in the Sama traditions by Machik Lapdön. Machik Lapdön, or short called just Machik Ma, is the celebrated founder of the chö tradition in the Sarma, the new traditions, versus the Nyingma, the old traditions. She lived in the 11th century, and a yogini who established chö as an enactment of the philosophy of shunyata, of the perfection of wisdom, of emptiness. And she was known to be very knowledgeable in the literature of the perfection of wisdom, or the prajna paramita. To gain the realization of the perfection of wisdom, the chöpa, or the meditator of chö, engages in a practice of the transference of consciousness, identifying one's consciousness with the pure Buddha nature, and then transforming the body that was left behind into nectar that then was offered. That's called rgyan, offering the body, being offered to all kinds of guests, but mainly to gods and demons, called laje. Who are these gods and demons? They are, well, they have a lot of layers of explanation. There's one layer where just anything that is helpful is considered a god, and anything that is harmful is considered a demon. So Machik Ma herself says it is actually this way of bifurcated or dualistic thinking in terms of good and bad, right and wrong. So if you think you don't believe in gods and demons, consider whether you judge things in terms of good and bad, right and wrong. If you do, then you're involved with gods and demons. Machik Ma also said it is a radical method, so coming back to the practice of chö, it is a radical method for cutting just that, this type of thinking, and cutting through the inflation of ego fixation, through the willingness to accept what is undesirable, and to disregard the difficult circumstances. So that refers to the fact that normally when we think in terms of good and bad, then we want the good stuff and we want to avoid the bad stuff. And here it is inversing this behavior by inviting whatever is uncomfortable, whatever is threatening, and so on. And through that comes a realization that gods and demons are one's own mind, and comes an understanding that oneself and others are actually totally equal. So this all comes from Jigme's complete explanations, explanations given by this 11th century yogini and scholar. And sometimes it sounds very modern, yeah. So because she's talking on this psychological level, and this book has been translated by Sarah Harding. So interested ones can read up on it. What is important maybe in all these practices that come from Jigme is that Jigme, identified as Laptön, is the main deity of this practice. Now, when we turn to chöd in the Nyingma tradition, one important thing to notice is that Jigme isn't there anymore. So here, the sadhana that we practiced, as I said, comes from the Longchen Nyingthik tradition. Longchen Nyingthik you can translate as the heart essence of the vast expanse, is a tradition in the Nyingma school, so the school of the old school, the ancient ones. Now coming to the name of this practice, I mentioned already Khandro Nyingthik, that's how you write it in Wiley. And I translate that as the Dakinis resounding expanse. But more often you read a translation something like the bellowing laughter of the Dakinis or the loud laughter of the Dakinis. Khentrul Rinpoche, and then later I also read Lama Wangdu, have actually said it has nothing to do with laughing. That's why I just took that out of the translation. It is more about expanse, about long-lasting, about unimaginable. So since ge actually normally is translated as laughter, the Tibetan word ge in rgyang, then I still kept that as resounding. So the Dakinis resounding expanse is the translation of this text, of this practice. And the author is the Tibetan treasure revealer Jigme Lingpa. He revealed actually the whole Longchen Nyingthik cycle. And you find a lot of translations for this practice. It is fairly well known, yeah. So there's translations even on the websites for Dolpo Tulku, Tony Duff, Karen Lilienberg, Pema Khandro, and so on. So, as I said, the important difference is that here we are not focusing on Laptön anymore, but on Guru Rinpoche. He is the center of attention in this practice. He is the focus of the Guru Yoga, for example. And the other difference is maybe this view on the ultimate. So we can see that right from the beginning of the sadhana. I will read here the first lines, which are actually just the explanation, not something that one recites. So one reads here, to the Queen of Space, the Lady of Great Bliss Tsogyal, I prostrate. The natural state of Dzogchen, the great completion, is one, once you have cut delusion from the root, since it transcends the object to be cut and the subject that cuts. Yeah, so that is the ultimate view. There is no more chö and there's no chöpa, there's no cutting. All of that has to be transcended ultimately. But then Jigme Lingpa goes on to say, however, ordinary people, deluded by elaborations, wish to practice yogic austerity, yeah, such as chö and going to nyensa. So for those, I will teach the pith instructions for offering the body as food. You will need the following things, and then he explains them. I will do that in a moment, but here one more word on, I will give the instructions for offering the body as food. Since here the focus is so much on the ultimate, whereas in Jigme's chö, there is a lot of explanation of how you eject the consciousness, what you visualize, all the different feasts. Here, the 4 different feasts, they're done in 3 lines. Yeah, so there's a lot of focus on developing the view, and then very little on actually the offering of the body. So that is also a difference. Now, what are the required objects? So the commentary and also the sadhana, they list them. To subdue the arrogant demons, for example, you need a mat made from carnivorous animal skin with 4 claws intact, so meaning a tiger fur. Well, we did not have that. To symbolize the superior view that overpowers from above, a tent just big enough for yourself is needed. And you see that in the background of this chöpa. And we got those. I will tell more about that. To symbolize, typo. To symbolize the conduct with ascents from below, you need a katanga. To have authority over gods and demons, a human thigh bone trumpet, a kangling, to blow. You can see he is holding it in one of his hands. To have authority over gods, demons, that we had already. To overcome appearances, you have a damaru, that is this a chöd drum. To bring under control the gatherings of mamos, is a class of demons, there are little bells on one's damaru. And actually, there are different lists that are slightly different, but more or less, it is all that. So you can see, for attaining the ultimate view, you need quite a lot of stuff. Where do we learn about this? We learn it in, for example, one of the commentaries. There are 3 main commentaries that I studied before we went on nyensa. First of all, the excellent vase of nectar, the secret treasury of the Dakinis, by Rinzing Nangje Dorje from the 18th century. So this commentary explains step by step the dances, the visualizations, the recitations. Then you also have it in another commentary which comes from the author of the sadhana, again, Jigme Lingpa, and that is called Explanations on the Way of the Chöd Practitioner, the 6 Perfections Youthful Energy. This commentary is interesting because it picks up on all these different objects, which are, you saw that, they're quite wild and look more like maybe instruments that you would expect with a shaman. And in order to show how this practice is nevertheless part of the bodhisattva path, he equates the different objects with something with a quality from the bodhisattva path. So here's an excerpt. Jigme Lingpa says, "Homage to the masters of chö, the blood drinkers. Chö is in essence the totality of the 6 perfections. And normally we know the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva path, right? So it is defined as cutting all clinging to a self. And here he says, what this chöpa needs is a net of generosity, a mat of moral discipline, a tent of forbearance or patience, the horn, the kangling of diligence, the meditation belt of meditative concentration, and the hand drum, the damaru of wisdom." And then the commentary goes into a lot of detail to show how each of these instruments that the chöpa uses has actually a very deep philosophical meaning. Then just to mention another commentary, there is also a brief guide to journeying to wild places according to the chöd practice, and that is called Dakinis vast, or the chöd practice is called Dakinis vast resounding expanse, the Khandro Nyingthik. And this was written by Atsum Gyaltse Gyurme Dorje, who lived 1895 to 1969, so nearly a contemporary chöd practitioner and scholar. This commentary focuses mostly on the inner attitude and the behavior when you are on this nyensa. And it says, although the basis is compassion, but then it talks a lot about how the chöpa should engage in forceful action. And here I give you an excerpt. And I'm pulling out these excerpts because, again, they are quite different from the chöd that we know from Machikma. It is all about this power demonstration. Yeah. So it says here, you should search for the energy center, literally the earth eye of the wild places. Yeah, when you come to a new place in nature or on the cemetery, like a bird searches for a location to nest, by following the general scriptures of the chöd practice and examining carefully. Then it is said in the 3 cycles of overpowering with splendor, first, if you do not overpower them, the demons, before the early threshold, the evil enemies will escape like birds. That means you will lose the advantage over them. So again, quite forceful language here. Yeah, you have to overpower them first, and then it explains how. Yeah, by visualizing a vajra that flies into the space and then trembles the earth, and everybody gets overpowered. So again, the emphasis is on power rather than on yielding your resistance and offering your body as we would expect from Machikma's chö. Now, I have given you a little bit of an impression of how this practice is conducted and what it means to go through these wild places. I would like to turn now to another question, and that is questions that I had as a practitioner. Yeah. Mainly, what does it mean for a practitioner in the 21st century to do these practices that talk about demons and gods and so on? Yeah, so that's me, and that is the kind of tent that we had. And I told you I would tell you a story. This tent, actually half an hour after this picture, there came a snowstorm, and then it turned out that it wasn't waterproof. So then I was sitting there in the puddle, and over me, around me, accumulated all this water. We abandoned these very fancy-looking chöd tents, and then went on with some modern camping tents that actually were waterproof. So that happens, yeah. One of the participants in the chö, he had them made by a tent maker in Parping, and it was quite some work to. They were very heavy, first of all. Then it was quite some work to put this ornamentation around. Yeah, and then they were useless. So the questions that I then had to grapple with while I was doing this were questions like, what does it mean, this interaction with invisible beings? What does it mean facing fear, and what does it mean facing the inescapable? So let's look at these three questions. So chö contains various interactions with invisible beings. You have the local spirits or the shidaks, you have gods and demons, you have dakas and dakinis, you have so-called mothers or mamos. Then in the text is mentioned the 8 types of demons and the 4 types of devils, and so on and so forth. Some of them are powerful and ill-intentioned. Some others are said to be weak and needy. And through this ritual of chö, the powerful demons are summoned and overcome. And at various points in the ritual, then the chöpa imagines to give away their body and to appease them, the weak ones, but the powerful ones, to pin them down with ritual daggers and so on. Then again, yeah, you offer your own body. Sometimes the offering is kind of bloody. There's talk of the skin and the flesh and the blood and the bones, and at other times it's all transformed into pure nectar. All of this stuff goes on, but what does it mean for a contemporary practitioner with all of that? I asked Khentrul Rinpoche how to think about these things. He explained that reality is what we familiarize ourselves with. So he said, by inviting local spirits again and again, by observing nature, by observing signs, we become more receptive to the world that is inhabited by invisible beings. And eventually we would be able to see them, interact with them. And he himself reported from time to time that he had dreams, or at night he heard voices, and he told us what they were telling him. And also he would explain the signs around us to us. But I have to admit, I never saw a demon the whole time. I didn't hear voices. So what does it mean then for me? And for others, yeah, chö is a practice that draws huge crowds nowadays. You have sometimes here below in the Hlakang, hundreds of people coming together, or outside Garab Rinpoche is attracting a lot of practitioners who come together and practice. What does it mean for them? Then you have contemporary practitioners like Tsiltrim Aljone, who brought the practice to America. She developed a therapy model that is based on chöd, and it's called Feeding the Demons. And there she explains that demons represent everything that brings out our resistance. And her therapy model and her practice explains how, instead of pushing against them, the idea is to yield, to give in as a way of dealing with problems in life. Yeah, so I can relate to this level of understanding. Now, moving on, facing fear. Chöd is often explained as a practice where we face fears. Once on our journey, on our nyensa journey, we had a conversation with several elderly men, and when they heard that we were meditating on cemeteries, on charnel grounds, they were truly horrified by the idea that we could possibly encounter demons. So how can fear actually be used for meditation? Here I will read you a quotation which comes from Michael Sheehy, that is again an American scholar who did research on chöd, and he says, fear and terror can either be spiritually enhancing or spiritually debilitating. By going to the source of the fear and terror, the power of the chöd approach comes from not emphasizing the manifestation of terror, for example, terrorists or demons, but rather through cutting the deeply embedded notions of other at the core of conscious awareness. So this is a way that chöd can be used if there's actually fear. But then if you don't see the demons in the charnel grounds, then also the fear is not very strong. Yeah. This here, for example, is a charnel ground that is probably different than what you expected. But this is a place above one of the villages near Pematsal, near village Pembatang. And people bring up their relatives and burn them there. And then they were building up piles of stones as stupas. And so at this place where I had put up my tent here, around many dead people had been burned and buried. The ashes had been buried. But I don't know, it's maybe my character, or maybe because I never experienced something fearful, I didn't experience fear. I have to admit, if I had been all on my own, that would have been different. So anyway, I understand the idea of dealing with fear as a way of really facing this fundamental grasping at a sense of self that we want to defend, at anything that could threaten it, and how facing that can enhance the practice. Now, what I found when I contemplated what really made me work through this nyensa, what made me work in the sense what I had to work with, it was this idea of facing the inescapable. I mentioned already, I had no idea what I was getting into. Here, for example, we spent the night in this flimsy hut over Panch Pokari, which was very, very cold. But then in the morning, there was this amazing view. So both quite amazing. So for me, maybe the most accurate description of my challenges during the nyensa is to say facing the inescapable. I'm used to a pretty great deal of control in my normal life. Yeah, I decide what I eat, where I go to, who I meet, to a certain degree, even what kind of work I do, when I go to work. And all of that I had to give up all of a sudden, because I just had to follow what the leading Lama said. I often felt like being left out because I was the only foreigner, and my Nepali isn't that good to follow the conversations. And so then there was also, of course, physical exhaustion, sometimes the lack of food, then there was the cold, the rain, and so on. All of that made my inescapable situation, and that is what brought up my demons that I had to work with. And there I could then relate to the practice. Actually, the commentaries, they talk about measures of success or failure in the practice. And in those commentaries, it was this excellent vast commentary, the challenges are seen as something good because it obliges us to face our inner resources, or not only to face, to bring them out. So the cutting of chö is successful when these signs occur. It is cut when all thoughts and worries and doubts vanish without a trace. That would be a sign of success. It is cut when the flow of mindfulness and awareness is unbroken. When whatever arises is seen in essence as unfabricated. When whatever arises with strength, so when strong emotions arise, when they are liberated in their own place. So that is, of course, all these results would be linked to the practice of either Mahamudra or Dzogchen, where we are asked to train by looking directly into what arises without trying to transform it or make it better, make it worse, but just see it for what it is. So I think you get the idea of the inescapable. Yeah. So that was kind of the occasions where I think we all, if we manage to face, we agree that this is something that makes us grow. So here the idea of capturing the demons can be understood in another way. Do I have it here? No, I did not, but I will read you the quote that I took out of the commentaries. Here the idea is that since challenges make us grow, there is a way of triggering that even more challenges come. And that is then the idea of provoking the demons. Therefore, when we come to a place, we should, and the demons do not really pay attention to us. It says we must grab them by the feet, swing them around over our heads and smash them to the ground, so to make them angry, so that they challenge us, and then we have something to work with. So maybe that gives us a handle of how to deal with all these commentaries that say that we should challenge the demons rather than just, give our body. So, conclusion. As a modern day practitioner, we can use this nyensa maybe to, not so much to see actually the beings that inhabit a place in the forest and in the mountains, but as an opportunity to to form a new relationship with whatever causes suffering. Yeah, when we feel fear and when we feel trapped in our situations in life, that is maybe everybody's nyensa. So in that sense, we are all on a nyensa all the time. And I think I will end here. If you want to know more, recently one of my students built this website of Needing Khentrul Rinpoche, and there is also the start of a book about this nyensa, meditating in wild places. And here you can see Rinpoche in the cold place up there. I will end here and then rather let you have some questions and have more conversation about what you want to know. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful talk. I'm drawn to the part where you said the offering of the body sometimes can be like bones and, like quite bloody, but sometimes can be nectar. And because this is my first sort of exposure to learning about this practice, I'm wondering if you could share more about what that practice looks like. Is it like a visualization of offering or like a bit more detail? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I did not go into all the details because some of you know chö quite well. It is, first of all, a practice where you chant a liturgy, like in many of the Tibetan practices. Here you have a bell and a chö damaru, and the chants are like a guided meditation. And in this guided meditation, you have common elements like a lineage prayer, refuge, developing bodhicitta, in the end a dedication that is like you have in all practices. Then the speciality of the chöd practice as it was brought by Machi Lapdren into this world is that you associate yourself with your pure essence, and that is visualized in a pure form. Pure form means a deity representing the perfection of wisdom or emptiness, and thereby you distance yourself from this flesh and blood body that we have only for a limited time in this life. And the idea is, okay, let's do something useful with it. Let's transform it into an offering and practice generosity and appease our karmic creditors and so on. And so that is done in imagery that, well, scholars would probably say that comes from shamanism, because it is chopping up the body, putting it in a skull cup, putting it on a fire, purifying it with visualizations, and then turning it into its pure aspect. So that is the outer aspect. The inner aspect is what I talked about right now a lot, yeah? Giving up this, our fundamental grasp to the self goes in this life through this body, and everybody through their own body. So the idea is, let's work with that, the fear of giving that up. And that is something that we fundamentally don't want, yeah? Nobody wants to even have this body hurt, let alone giving it up. So therefore, in this practice, we face these fears, and it has to be done with an understanding of an ultimate view. Otherwise, it would be suicidal. Yeah. So there's a lot that has to be explained. It's an advanced practice, but in a nutshell, I would say it is that. And I don't know if you want to, if anybody wants to add something to that. Some of you practice it.
Thank you. I'm wondering if, like in your personal experience up on the mountains, and maybe later or before on what you mentioned, that there was like this great split between, let's say, more theoretical or text preparation based preliminaries compared to before. So I wonder if Machi Lapdren's practice you conceive more like a somatic approach.
Somatic in which sense? What do you want to say by that?
Well, in the sense of, okay, I'm coming from a very strong somatic background. So for when I hear visualization, it's still like a conceptual cognition for me, compared to like somatic, which is like the non-cognitive in terms of like how Buddhism defines.
Yeah, yes. I would say, generally speaking, Buddhism, and especially Tantric Buddhism, addresses this level because the understanding is that whatever transformation is done on a conceptual level is only preliminary. It will not lead to the most profound transformation. And that is, this most profound transformation is necessary in order to liberate the mind and attain awakening. So this Lama, who, of course, I had many conversations with throughout the journey and before about what is this, what am I supposed to do? He comes from a standpoint where you exactly have to use your body a lot in order to bring about this primordial wisdom to manifest. In his understanding, Dzogchen is so on the one hand something that naturally, spontaneously manifests, but in order to let that happen, you have to put a lot of effort into creating the context for it. And working with the body is definitely, I don't know, in a hierarchy, the most important in order to make it happen. while, for example, normally he's residing at a retreat place that is called Knitting. And when he's there, he teaches how to do yogic exercises to make the body supple. And that has an effect on the, you could say, the subtle energies of the body, because he says, if you are not preparing your body, the mind alone cannot do it. Yeah, the visualizations, philosophical understanding, and even the most perfect meditation that is only happening in the mind wouldn't do it. So for him, going on this nyensa, the fact that you get exhausted, that you might hurt yourself, you have to deal with hunger and with cold and with pain. All of that was definitely a part of the practice. And at the same time, you have to learn the view or the attitude towards these experiences to really make it part of the practice. And one way of describing how you deal with that is by this facing the inescapable, I called it, giving in, yeah, not letting obstacles take over, because then it is the demons take over. Actually, you know what happened? There were two among the practitioners. We were at one point, so we always had to go up the mountains, down the mountains, up, down, because we were going east and the mountain ranges all go north, south. And we were at one of these lower points where street road comes up, and there was a bus that said Kathmandu. And two of them, within 5 minutes, decided we are going back. They gave up. They didn't go until the end of the 108. I didn't give up, but I didn't go the 108 because my sabbatical was coming to an end, so I could only go 30 days. You have to work on your attitude. So the somatic, where does the somatic come in? I think it is a combination of the body responses and how you prepare the mind. Yeah, there's not such a difference, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, at the end, of course, there is no difference, but I'm just, because I'm not actually familiar so much with the texts. Mm-hmm. And because you mentioned this, difference in approach, mm-hmm. and that made me curious.
Yeah. Well, Tibetan Buddhism or Tantric Buddhism, in some sense, it is a 24/7 affair. Yeah, so it is a diving into an alternative reality in order to realize the ultimate reality. Why? Because as long as we keep operating within this reality of a physical body and solidity, it is very difficult to understand emptiness. Now, why should this be empty? I can touch it, it's very solid. Yeah. So the tantric world gives us a chance to getting familiar with energies, allowing that there could be a reality that is not this physical reality. And therefore, the chöd practice and other practices, they operate on all different levels. There is the imagination, there is the pronunciation of liturgies, of mantras, of chanting, there is dancing, there is music, using instruments, there is movement. It kind of has to envelop, embrace your whole being, every level of it. And then if you are able to, make that at least part of your reality of your life, it opens up doors to see the world differently, to see situations differently, and you will find yourself more or less naturally, automatically interact differently with situations. So it is not so much like, okay, now I learned that when I'm facing a person that makes me angry, I should do this and that. It's not this kind of recipe approach. In that sense, I'm saying it is somatic, because you kind of make something happen on a level that you don't always control. Yeah, and you might have met Tibetan teachers. Very often they don't give explanations like I'm trying to do now. They just do it, and then it will work. I think for me, it helped to know a little bit how it is supposed to help. Then I think it helps giving confidence in just engaging then in those practices.
We have a few questions online.
Okay.
So Arwen is asking, I am wondering if Professor Stenzel could comment further on the shamanic dimensions of the chöd practice from both her personal experience and research.
Oh, actually, I cannot say very much about it. I have read, yeah, just because outwardly, the trumpet that is being blown, that is a human thigh bone trumpet, and the visualizations, obviously, yeah, of chopping up a body. This is said to be coming from shamanic backgrounds. I did not do a whole lot of research in that area. There are scholars who do that, and the word shaman carries also a lot of connotations in Nepal. While I was traveling, speaking to people, I realized that here very often the shaman has the function of a healer, a medicine man in villages. But as I said, I didn't do research about it. It is sure that within the chöd tradition, there is the idea, there is the side idea that once you have done work on yourself, you will be able also to heal others. But first of all, it is to becoming a Buddha yourself. Then, not only through chöd, through all tantric practices, practitioners develop powers. Yeah, and when I was here in this little group going on the nyensa, in several villages, people came automatically up to they heard there's a lama who has some powers, and they came up and then they told, I have this problem, that problem, can you heal me? And then he always did something for them, and sometimes later he got a phone call and said, yeah, it helped. And sometimes it was about healing a sickness, other times it was, yeah, we have a school that is haunted and many of our students faint all the time, can you do something about it? Then he did chöd there himself. That was later when I was already gone. So there is the idea of helping through this practice, but first of all, the responsibility of the practitioner is for him or herself. Yeah, and sorry, I cannot really say much more about shamanism.
Well, Arwen also asks if you have any pieces of advice for Western practitioners of chöd who wish to accomplish the nyensa. Would you have any advice for practitioners, particularly from the West, and how we might approach the instructions of the nyensa? Do we need to visit the holy places of India and Nepal?
I have heard from one other person who did by himself nyensa within the Kathmandu Valley, and he had instructions from his own lama to do so. So I think you need to find a teacher who gives you the empowerment to do that, the blessing and the instructions. And for example, Khentrul Rinpoche is one of them. So go to knitting and try your best.
So Juju asks, is there any qualification to really go to the charnel ground to practice chöd? Does it relate to preliminary practice? Since Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche's book mentioned it has a danger to be mad if one's mind is not prepared in a certain extent.
Yeah, that is an important question. All tantric practice needs preparation. So one needs a teacher that you trust and whose instruction you follow. And very often that teacher will tell you, start with the preliminaries. And the preliminaries give a foundation in having trust in the lineage, in the methods, purifying, giving up through offerings, mental and actual offerings, and so on and so forth. With all tantric practices, there is the danger that if there's too much grasping at the outer form of the practice, that you could go mad or harm yourself by just too much grasping. Yeah, too much grasping is at the root of all our problems, actually. Yeah, believing that what comes up in our mind is actually real, and therefore my my anger has a reason to be there, and my desire means I should follow it, and so on and so forth. So the stronger the grasping, then the bigger the problem, and therefore we have to give ourselves a context where there's trust to a person who confronts you and says you're totally wrong, do it differently, and so on, and then you actually believe that teacher. If you don't trust the teacher and you resist the teacher, it's difficult to give yourself to the practices. And chö is definitely one of those practices where you need to prepare.
I think you've already started to hint at the next question that's happening here. So Daniel asks, is the overpowering in this approach done from within the view of Rigpa, or how do we ensure that it does not result in more self-grasping?
Yeah, if everything is done in Rigpa, then that sounds like no problem. Some people are attracted to tantric practices because of the aspect of power, yeah, having power, and it's not only through chö. If we are attracted to power because of for the sake of power, I think that is a problem in itself. Therefore, the foundation is always bodhicitta, compassion, wanting to help others, realizing that there is no difference between self and other, in the sense that we are all suffering in one way or the other because of our unskillful thinking and behaving, and that we all are striving towards getting rid of this suffering and attaining happiness. So all of those aspects are part of the preparation. And here at Rangdo Yesh Institute, you study that in the classes in an intellectual way, in the philosophical classes. And what I'm talking now, tantric practice, we are actually not teaching that very much in our classes because it's very personal. And it is something between you and your spiritual teacher. So I don't know how now I got a little bit carried over in that area. In any case, the preparation is really crucial, and the preparation is understanding the fundamentals of Buddhist philosophy and developing a mind of compassion and bodhicitta. And probably much more refuge.
We have one more question online from Dan. Says, thank you for speaking about this remarkable experience. It seems that the 4 delusionary spirits come directly out of the Prajnaparamita scriptures. I wonder if the fearful places isn't inspired by the same scriptures. There are passages about meditating in cemeteries and other frightening places. These are Indic sources and not Tibetan. So where did the shamanic enter in? What do you think?
Yeah. That is very true. Yeah, going to charnel grounds, you find that in the earliest sutras, the Buddha told his disciples to do that. For example, to study the decomposing of bodies and facing the fear of dying, understanding impermanence, and being very motivated to do practice. So that in itself has nothing Tibetan. That is true. Also, again, generally speaking, in Buddhism, you never have an invention that comes out of nothing. Yeah, and inventions are even frowned upon. There has always to be the continuation that shows the authenticity, that shows that a practice comes from India. And Machik Labdrön, yes, she was an expert in the wisdom sutras, the Prajnaparamita sutras. So, and she had supposedly teachers coming from India, for example, Padamba Sangye. So she was not inventing something out of the blue, but she was kind of weaving it together in a way that hadn't been seen before. For example, going onto a charnel ground and then using the damaru and the bell. That I'm not aware of, that the Indic scriptures would say that. And that also has an effect. Yeah, it makes you feel actually quite vulnerable when you make all that noise and otherwise it is silent and people can hear you from anywhere. So she brought in some elements, and some scholars say, well, she picked up the shamanic practices that existed already, combined it with the philosophy of shunyata that came out of the Buddhist scriptures, and therefore presented a practice that outwardly is shamanistic, inwardly is Buddhist, and that there are also other examples for this kind of development. Yes, please wait one moment for the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, is there any significance in the fact that I think it was in the Kagyu tradition, it's the Lhundrup, and then in that tradition it's Yeshu Togyo. Obviously, they're both female figures that seem to be associated or propagating this rather intense sort of visceral practice. You mentioned it, making this pose, and so I was just wondering.
Yeah. Well, here in the Khandro Nyingthik practice, even though it starts out with an homage to Yeshe Tsogyal, then in the rest of the practice, the main figure is really Guru Rinpoche. Yeah, so the Guru Yoga is focusing on Guru Rinpoche. Therefore, I wouldn't even say that this practice is so much connected to Yeshe Tsogyal. So you were asking whether you were wondering whether this is a connection to the female energy. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. That is true. And both practices, I try to show how they differ, but both practices start out with also a short self-visualization as Yum Chenmo, which is Prajna Paramita. And so you can see the practitioners asked first to check in with the realization of emptiness before then going into all kinds of actions. And it is as this Yum Chenmo, or Great Mother, that all the beings of the universe are invited. But then the visualization changes quite quickly, which also shows something of the fluidity of identity. Where one moment it is Yum Chenmo, the next moment you are the wrathful Heruka, and then you are Vajra Yogini, then you are the Black Dakini. So I cannot see really a pattern other than cut your identification to this self. If we don't have more questions, we can, yeah, okay, we have one more question, and then we can also slowly come to an end.
This one is. I came in a little bit late, so I apologize if this was already covered. But kind of in a zoomed out macro way, I'm wondering about the role of like travel as being in a liminal space in your work here. Is there more that you say about that? I mean, I'm just thinking almost everyone here has probably traveled, right, to be here, and there's something kind of archetypal about the power of being away from firm foundations that must be, I guess, part of this.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good question. Actually, I mentioned that according to the commentary, the chöd practitioner is supposed to move on every day. The rhythm should ideally be that in the evening at dusk, there's this communal practice, then there are these 3 night practices, and then in the morning you wrap up your tent and you wander to the next place, and there in the evening you do the same. You start by this communal practice, go set up your tent, and again spend the night elsewhere. During the month that I participated, we were not able to keep that rhythm simply for the fact that the holy places that we went to, they were quite far from one another, and sometimes we had to walk 8 hours, and then we arrived very late, we were exhausted, and so then we would stay 2-3 nights at a cave, for example. So that also shows actually quite interestingly how, even though you have a description of what you should do, and then there's the reality where you adapt. Yeah, you are supposed to dance around your tent before you go into the tent, and then sometimes your tent is here, and then there it goes down, and here's a cliff. Then you also have to improvise. Yeah, the fact that you are constantly changing your abode definitely has an impact, again, maybe somatic or on your experience. You're in some sense you're in awe because these you see these pictures. Yeah, the landscape was just amazing. In some sense you give up on comfort. You don't know where you will be, and sometimes you're completely wet, and sometimes you hurt yourself. Sometimes it was going down steep like that. I had to hold onto the bamboo in order not to fall, and then it hurts the hands. All kinds of things that have an influence on how you perceive the landscape and how you perceive the travel experience. Yeah. So it was an adventure. When you say adventure, you don't expect comfort necessarily. But something to work with. And it is not the Buddhists alone who say just by the fact of leaving home, you are already on also a spiritual journey. So all of these aspects definitely played into the experience. Is that something you have experienced in your own travels? Have you traveled in the sense of pilgrimage, of spiritual development during the travels? Mm. Mm. Yeah, it definitely starts you questioning the sense of home, no? Where we have our homes and all our objects in the home and how important they are. And then you can see with how little you can live from day to day. So it's just an inspiration to see life and the world differently than we usually do, and that in itself is you can use as a spiritual experience, right? Right. Thank you very much for your attention and for your questions. It was my pleasure sharing this with you.
Thank you so much, Julia.